Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. When we left on Friday, none of us expected to be telling the stories of yet another mass shooting. Two, in fact, in two cities and at least 29 people dead, both just hours apart from the other. We have reporters on the ground in both Dayton, Ohio and El Paso, Texas, and we have full coverage for the next hour, including how to cope with all of this, because these are the stories of America, because this is a uniquely American problem. We have more deaths by guns than any other country in the world because we have more guns, period. It's a problem that has left families heartbroken with deep, unspeakable pain, and one that leaves the people of this country without adequate words to describe or process the frustration. There have been so many massacres inspired by hatred, and in just the last 18 months, seven separate shootings were by white nationalists inside this country. The 251st mass shooting of this year was early Sunday morning in my hometown of Dayton, Ohio. 9 people lost their lives and more than a dozen went to a hospital wounded. And this came a few hours after the 250th mass shooting, a racially motivated attack on the Hispanic community in El Paso, Texas. Domestic terrorism that left at least 20 people dead and 26 wounded. But we're going to begin right here in El Paso. We have Marcus Moore there on the ground. So we want to bring him in because, Marcus, this is difficult to imagine all of these people shopping for back-to-school supplies, walking around on a normal Saturday, and then it turns into a war zone.
Well, Kimberly, good morning. It really is a terrible thing. We're just outside the Walmart where this happened, and you can see in the distance the cars that are still parked in the parking lot. This scene very much the way it was when the shooting happened on Saturday morning. And you mentioned all of the people, the families and the children who were here for their back-to-school shopping when all of this unfolded. And as you said, it turned into something akin to a war zone. And this morning, it is still a crime scene. They have removed all of the victims from the scene here, but it is still very much a crime scene where investigators are trying to piece together what happened. And as that unfolds, we see a growing memorial here near the scene where people have left candles, they've left flowers and stuffed animals, and also signs as a way to help this community cope from this tragedy that really came out of nowhere. No one expected this to happen here in El Paso, which, Kimberly, as you know, is a sprawling city. Hundreds of thousands of people live here right along the U.S.-Mexico border. In fact, Jeff, if we can pan over those buildings off in the distance and that terrain there, that is Ciudad Juarez, that is Mexico. And a number of people from Mexico come here to the U.S., come here to El Paso to shop on the weekends and also visit family, and vice versa. And so that gives you a sense of what this community is like and how it is so international, and why the thought, according to authorities, that someone would target the population here, primarily Hispanic, makes it very difficult. And Kimberly, before I send it back to you, I do want you to see what the scene looks like. Obviously, this has been of huge interest to local and national and also international media. And if we can walk, I want to show you what else we see here. This area has been blocked off since the shooting happened on Saturday morning, and you can see all of the various media organizations that have gathered here to tell this this terrible story of what happened. Excuse me. And this is a local restaurant and a parking lot across the street that's turned into an area where satellite trucks have been parked. And Kimberly, very quickly, one of the things that I have seen at the various mass shootings that I've had the unfortunate assignment to cover, we've seen this. These handmade wooden crosses that a gentleman has been making for the past, since 20 years he started doing this to make crosses for people who have passed away. And he has brought these crosses here to El Paso, once again, the scene of a terrible tragedy that has unfolded. And as a community and the country continues to try to heal. Kimberly, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Marcus. And pretty heavy, right? You know, Will Carr is also on the ground in El Paso, and he's been talking to survivors. So Will, I want to bring you in and give us an idea of who you've been speaking to.
Well, Kimberly, you just heard Marcus describe that this scene is like a war zone. Well, here at the hospitals in El Paso, they are dealing with war zone type casualties. There's still more than a dozen victims in hospitals across the city. Those victims range in age from kids as young as 2 years old all the way up to senior citizens. We spoke with one woman who was shot twice. She was actually outside of that Walmart as part of a fundraiser trying to raise money for her daughter's soccer team. At first, she says it sounded like firecrackers started exploding. Then she realized what was really happening, that they were under attack. Take a listen to what she said.
All of a sudden, in the middle of us laughing and having a good time talking, they just started shooting, but we didn't know there were shots. It sounded like somebody threw black cats at the street, and he just cold-bloodedly came straight at us and shot us. He shot 8 rounds. I had to pretend I was dead, and he was right next to me. And he shot 8 more rounds, and all I could say is, God, please take care of my children, and please don't let him do anything to my daughter. Got shot right here and on my heel. Nothing like this has ever happened here in El Paso, ever. And it's not fair that somebody from God knows where just showed up and did something so ugly to us with so much hatred.
And that's something I really want to key in on, because we were in Gilroy, California last Sunday, now here in El Paso. And one question that I have asked all of the victims from California here to Texas, and maybe we're more sensitive to this as journalists, but I've asked them if they ever prepared for a mass shooting, if they ever thought about having a plan or what they would do if somebody started firing into a crowd or a place where they were. And every single person that I've spoken with from California to Texas have told me, no, they never thought that it would actually happen in their towns. But Kimberly, as we've seen, this just keeps happening in communities all across the United States. There's not one city that is impervious to a potential attack like this. And it's really a conversation that families need to have as well, is exactly what you would do in this situation. And in this particular situation, because you had so many parents and so many kids, many got split up and they didn't know how to find their kids or how to find their parents. You're talking about going for hours, not knowing exactly where your loved ones were. So one thing that needs to be a little bit of this conversation is exactly what you'll do with your loved ones if you find yourself in a similar situation. Kimberly.
Yeah, Will, a conversation that no one wants to have, and that is absolutely crazy that you were in Gilroy. We were just talking to you in Gilroy, and now just days later here in El Paso. Thank you for the updates. And guys, I want to move over to Washington, where the president spoke this morning about these 2 shootings. So take a listen to what he had to say.
In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul.
All right, so I want to bring in Jordan Phelps, who joins us at the White House. Jordan, the comments are really interesting. The president says that hate has no place in America, but a lot of people have criticized his rhetoric and how that influences this hatred that we see.
Yeah, Kimberly, the president there offering a direct condemnation of the hate-fueled rhetoric that kind of led to this shooting. But the president there not taking responsibility for his own rhetoric. We've heard from all of the Democratic presidential candidates roundly criticizing the president for his rhetoric on race, blaming him directly for specifically the El Paso shooting. We've seen a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric from this president. We've seen a lot of hot racial rhetoric from him. The president there not bringing that up, calling for the nation to come together. But Kimberly, I expect we will continue to hear from those Democratic candidates today and see whether or not they're satisfied by the president's words today and whether those words are followed up by action.
Yeah, Jordan, people are deeply unsatisfied because there is a House bill that's waiting to make its way to the Senate floor. The president suggested working together. Do we think that we'll see some moves actually happen? Universal background checks, for example. He didn't mention that.
Kimberly, it's interesting. We heard the president this morning on Twitter call for background checks, but what we didn't hear from him in those remarks at the White House today was a similar call. We heard him talk a lot about mental illness, about improving systems to intercept these sort of hateful spews on the internet before they turn into action. But it's not clear now after that morning tweet and then the president not bringing it up here at the White House whether or not he is earnest about pursuing those sorts of changes. It's important to note that while the House did pass a bill earlier this year, the White House at the time put out a veto threat saying the president would veto any such legislation if it made it to his desk. Perhaps there's a change of heart here. Now, Kimberly, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and so I want to ask you, do you think that the president, if there's any chance that he will put pressure on Congress to come back from recess and address this?
You know, for now, Kimberly, Congress is still out on a month-long August recess. We've heard Chuck Schumer, the Democratic minority leader, call for Congress to come back in session to consider this in the Senate. The ball really is in the Senate's court, but those calls haven't grown any further at this point. We'll have to wait and see if the president really meant what he said on Twitter this morning. And right now, Kimberly, there's no sign that Congress is coming back to session.
All right, Jordan Phelps right there in the White House. And guys, we are going to continue our coverage after a break. Full coverage of Dayton, Ohio, El Paso, domestic terrorism, and how to cope with these tragedies. We'll be right back.
ABC News, straightforward. In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
Do you trust him?
I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange.
Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Whew. Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working now?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
Sheriff's office! We march together.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Okay, imagine the morning. I'm talking about a good morning. Imagine starting your day off with friends. What's better than that? You know, like the crazy smart friend who always keeps you in the know. The friend with a huge heart and smile who just makes everything better. Imagine hearing from people who open your eyes and your heart. Imagine knowing what's coming next in the day ahead. Well, I get to live this each morning together with you. Imagine that. How blessed am I? And that's what makes it such a good morning, America.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Debrief on ABC News Live. You're seeing pictures there from the vigil in El Paso. Again, there have been 216 days in 2019, and there have been 251 mass shootings. Mass shootings are defined as having 4 or more victims shot or killed, and they're increasingly fueled by deep hatred of white nationalists inside these borders. Our David Muir was in El Paso speaking to the police chief about this, so take a listen.
We came here to El Paso, 600 miles.
Right.
Was it the makeup of this community? Was it your proximity to the border?
I think both. I think those questions need to be asked of him in a court of law, you know, because I think there's questions that still need to be answered. I know we're not asking all of those necessarily to really make everyone understand what he did, but I think those questions need to definitely be posed to him.
and they're concerns of yours?
They're definitely concerned because, as we saw with the other event, there's copycats out there.
All right, so I want to bring in Pierre Thomas in our D.C. bureau. Pierre, we know that this guy in El Paso, he drove some 600 miles to attack the Mexican community. And you informed us that the FBI has been tracking active shooters, and the numbers are disturbing, yes?
They absolutely are. We're seeing a surge, the FBI says, in the number of hate crimes that they're seeing reported. Also, we're seeing a significant spike in what is defined as active shooter incidents. Those are situations in which an armed gunman shows up at a public place, mall, school, church, and tries to kill people. When the FBI first began tracking this particular phenomenon, we were averaging about 6 of these incidents per year as a country. That was in the early 2000s. By 2017, it was 30 incidents a year. 30. So that's really striking. And as you said, if you couple that with the number of mass shootings, which the Gun Violence Archive is recording, we have a epidemic of incidents where people are showing up, often with assault-style rifles, and killing people.
And Pierre, what do you think is the most concerning part? I know you had mentioned, when a person sees another shooter do this, then they can potentially copycat or they want to emulate the situation.
That's right. The FBI, and I was surprised at how quickly they put this out, but over the weekend, they put out a statement that's saying, based on what happened in El Paso and based on what happened in Dayton, Ohio, that they are concerned that other extremists, other people who are unbalanced might take acts of domestic terror, or there might be copycats. So that's a real ongoing concern. So right now you have law enforcement asking for the public's help, that if you see something, hear something, even if it involves a family member or a friend, you've got to contact local law enforcement so they can, in some cases, get your associate or friend or loved one help, or in some cases take action to keep them from doing an act of violence.
And what are the warning signs that people should be looking for?
Well, one of the warning signs is that often they find that these people are posting really violent rhetoric online. In the case of the Nazi killer in Charlottesville who ran over that woman and killed her and tried to run over the crowd, he had posted on social media a photograph basically indicating that running over people with a vehicle was a good thing. He had also, a known Nazi, had spoken openly of his support and affinity for Adolf Hitler. So what you see is that often either people who are hate mongers or who have various issues, they say something that indicates that they are going to take action, and often people simply don't take them serious enough to report them.
And Pierre, before we go, what happened this weekend, it's domestic terrorism. What do you think accounts for the rise in these cases, these incidents?
Well, it's a combination of many things, but one of the things law enforcement is particularly concerned about is just in the way we saw ISIS use social media to communicate with people that aren't necessarily even a part officially of their group. White supremacists are now posting things online and encouraging other people who are like-minded to take action. And again, you don't even have to be a formal member of the group. It's just that this hate is spreading through social media almost like a virus.
All right, Pierre Thomas right there in our D.C. bureau. Thank you so much for joining us today. And guys, one of the most disturbing details about El Paso is the fact that reports came out that said some of the people that were wounded didn't want to seek care because of their immigration status. Can you even imagine that? It prompted presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke to tweet out a message in Spanish telling people if they need help, they can contact the Hope Border Institute. So I'm joined now by Marissa Limon from this institute. Marissa, it's pretty wild to have, two wildly tragic situations to worry about, your immigration status and this mass shooting at the same time.
Absolutely. It's unfortunate reality that many immigrant communities face here in this country, especially when we correlate it with the rhetoric that comes out of this administration and the work that the president has done to amplify these issues, it is an unfortunate reality that many people face on a daily basis, let alone when tragedy like this strikes.
So how has your organization been helping the community?
Really, it's been with an information awareness campaign to make sure that those that are impacted understand that there are levels of support. We work with a variety of faith communities in El Paso, and those pastors and chaplains have been made aware and are very cognizant of what's going on. They've been directly in the hospitals, at the reunification centers, and working with families and making the plea that families can understand, that parents, loved ones from children, from adults can understand that they can come forward. Unfortunately, we have had this instance in the past where people, especially in other mass casualties like this, have not been feeling comfortable to come forward and to take a stand to make a claim of their relative or family member because of the threat of deportation. And that's something that we've been witnessing here on the borderland for many months, and now it just seems to have ratcheted up to a whole new level.
And the organization, I saw a tweet where you guys said our border is not a war zone. What did you mean by that?
Really, this is a beautiful binational, bicultural community that has been a natural migratory route for generations. And so to have this enforcement policies first, this militarization, and then adding, these heavy armed military style rifles being used to mow down our fellow community members, that is not the response that we are about. We're a community that values heart over hate. We're a community that has our own manifesto of love, of justice, of compassion, of welcoming the stranger and standing with our neighbors. And so this is our response to what other people have put upon our community. But we know what the El Paso, Juarez, Las Cruces area is about, and that's about community, solidarity, family, love, and support.
All right, Marissa, before we go, if you can just remind us of where people can go to get help from the Hope Border Institute.
Absolutely. People can reach out to us at hopeborder.org, also at info@hopeborder.org. We're also on all social media channels. We have folks who can also reach out to us by phone here at 915-872-8400. Thank you so much.
All right, Marissa Limon with the Hope Border Institute, thank you so much for joining us today. And guys, we're going to take a quick break and come back with full coverage of Dayton, Ohio.
ABC News, straightforward. In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
You trust him?
I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange.
Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Whew.
Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working now?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying.
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
Sheriff's office! We march together.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Okay, imagine the morning. I'm talking about a good morning. Imagine starting your day off with friends. What's better than that? Like the crazy smart friend who always keeps you in the know. The friend with a huge heart and smile who just makes everything better. Imagine hearing from people who open your eyes and your heart. Imagine knowing what's coming next in the day ahead. Well, I get to live this each morning together with you. Imagine that. How blessed am I? And that's what makes it such a good morning, America.
What happened this morning is a tragedy in this world, not just today, but for all over the world, because this has got to stop, and it has to start with us.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Debrief on ABC News Live. You saw a woman there in Dayton, Ohio. I guess it's crazy to say you never think it will happen to you because it's happening everywhere now, but I think I still had shock learning that this mass shooting had touched my hometown of Dayton, Ohio. It was a normal night out turned tragic in the bustling, historic downtown, the Oregon district, where I've been so many times. 9 people dead, more than a dozen wounded, and a city changed forever. So Alex Perez is right there in Dayton with the latest. Alex, can you just give us an idea of where things stand right now?
Yeah, Kimberly, that sense of tragedy and loss is still in the air here. As you mentioned, it is palpable. I'm going to start with some updated figures that authorities just gave us. As we know, 9 people confirmed dead in this tragedy, but investigators now saying that the number of injured has increased. That number now up to 37 people injured. Investigators say people remain hospitalized at this time. They also now say the shooter, Connor Betts, had about 250 rounds on him. Now, I want to give you an idea of where we are. You mentioned this district, the entertainment district. We are outside near a bar called Ned Pepper's Bar, and I want you to take a look. You can see the memorial here is growing. People from all over the area coming by, leaving flowers, leaving candles, saying prayers, doing whatever they can to try to remember and memorialize those lives that were lost here in Dayton, Ohio. Now, I want you to take a look. As you might imagine, this is a story that rocked the country, rocked this area. So journalists, media have descended here on Ohio, and take a look across the street. You can see countless number of cameras and journalists reporting this story. There's a sign right up there. Maybe you can see it. It says, "Thanks, Dayton Police." And on the other side, it says, "Dayton Strong Love." Now, the police response here was incredible. Investigators say authorities were able to encounter and subdue, shoot, and kill the suspect, 24-year-old Connor Betts, within 30 seconds. Now, this is how it all unfolded. This, as you can see, is a busy street, but on a Saturday night, there are people who are out walking around, milling around on this street. There are bars, restaurants, clubs that sort of line this area here. Well, those people were all out and about on Saturday night when authorities say the gunman came out and just opened fire. Now, he never made it inside a bar, but he was subdued, killed outside of this bar, Ned Pepper's Bar. And you can see there's a growing memorial outside of that bar there, too. Now, authorities at this point are still trying to figure out what the exact motive in this case was. They have told us that one of the victims was the suspect's sister. And one of the injured was a person they're calling a companion, someone that was with them that evening. Investigators say the gunman, his sister, and this companion arrived in this area earlier in the evening. Then you fast forward a few hours, and that's when that tragic shooting took place. Authorities say they are talking to, interviewing that companion, and they're hoping to learn more information about what exactly was unfolding in the hours before the shooting. But at this point, Kimberly, the exact motive here still remains unclear.
And Alex, you were able to talk to some of the people on the ground there?
I think I lost you, Kimberly. I can't hear you.
So I think we lost Alex there, but I want to go to a clip of him talking to some of the people there, his interview right here. So let's take a listen at it.
I feel like she could have got saved. I feel like if the ambulance got here quick enough, I feel like a lot of them could have got saved.
One of your friends?
Yes, a real good friend. She was real good to everybody. Like, she had 2 children, 2 pretty young girls. She was real cool, laid back. She wasn't no drama type of person. She went out, had fun, never got into an altercation, or no fights, no arguments or anything.
How old was your friend, and
27.
27. What do you want people to know about her? And
she was real good.
She
was a real good friend. I mean, she really known through the city. Like, a lot of people know her. She was real cool, laid back. Like, I really don't know.
And describe for you today. I know it's been difficult. How are you? How are you just trying to make sense of all this? Is there any way?
As of right now, no. I'm just speechless. I really don't know what to say. It just happened so soon.
You talked a little bit about what you saw and you talked about dirt flying and those kinds of things. What was that?
On the news where I see where she was running from, like when she was running, it was like he was aiming towards them, because I seen him, like the bullet went through the dirt and shot up in the air. I didn't see when she fell, like I didn't see if she hit the ground or anything. I didn't see that.
What came out of the bar?
Just bodies laying everywhere, white sheets over the bodies. But like I said, I don't see how you get through here with a big old gun and 16 magazines. Like, how did you get past the cops like that? It's cops on each corner. I don't see how did you make it past all these cops with this gun? And then you had a mask on, so they should have been aware of, okay, why is he walking through the Oregon district with a mask on?
So last night, how did you find out something was going on? You came out, or did you hear a noise?
They actually shut the club down.
So you're inside the club, they shut the club down, and then what happened?
They put everybody out through the back, and it was like everybody, this is my first time being down here. So through the back, it's like trash cans, and I seen a few cars, and I'm like, okay, people out here shooting, how are y'all just putting us out in the back of a club? We don't know where to go. It's when you turn one way, it's a dead end, you turn another way, we just had to figure out our own way, and then we came from the other side of the building, and we just seen a whole bunch of bodies.
So you walk out of the club and you come on the other side of the building, and what do you see when you get out here?
Cops everywhere, guns, stuff getting blocked off. We tried to get to my car. The cop kind of pushed me, was like, no, we're not letting nobody get to their cars. They told us to walk all the way down towards the hub. And that was pretty much it. I was here until 6 o'clock this morning. I didn't get in my car until 6 o'clock this morning.
And so you walked out and you saw the victims?
I saw everybody laying on the ground with sheets over their head, over their bodies.
How heartbreaking, difficult is it to be dealing with this in America again?
It's very heartbreaking. Very, I never really experienced it, never really had to deal with someone that it hit so close to home. I just wish she would just wake up in a hospital and be like, hey, y'all, I'm cool. I'm okay. It was just a little graze. But she's really gone.
Yeah, Alex, we had lost you earlier, but we just listened to that pretty devastating story. Hard to hear that.
Yeah, that was Ariana Camp, who I interviewed here on the district. As you heard her say, she was actually inside one of the bars, Newcomb's here, when all of this unfolded. Of course, for her, big witness to all of this, coming out, seeing those victims, those bodies on the ground here, it was devastating. It's heartbreaking. And as you heard her say, she's not quite sure how she's going to be able to process all this, where she begins the idea of moving forward. But that's something that a lot of people in this community here are dealing with and still trying to sort of make sense of all this, if possible. I want to show you one sign. As I mentioned, there are a bunch of people who have been coming here. This tragedy has brought people of all walks of life together. I've seen strangers hugging. I've seen officers hugging people. And one of the signs we saw here that's just a symbol of how people here are trying to cope. It says, "Let the new day dawn, O Lord, I pray." People here are trying to do what they can with this tragedy to help build from it, to learn from it, and become stronger. Kimberly?
All right, Alex Perez right there in Dayton, Ohio. Thank you so much. So what are we going to do about it? That's the question we asked after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Parkland, after Orlando, and so many others. And here we are asking the same question again. People are fed up. Take a listen to this crowd chanting at the governor of Ohio. And then we even had a U.S. soccer player, Alejandro Bedoya. He had words after his game on Sunday.
Congress, do something now. End gun violence. Let's go.
Yeah, everyone is fed up. This country wants change. And I want to bring in Susie Lane, who's with Moms Against Gun Violence. Susie, are you there?
Yes, but let me just correct you just a little bit. It's Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America.
Yes, I'm sorry. And so I wanna ask you, what do you think of the Senate holding up a bill that would actually make a difference, start to move this forward a bit?
Well, I was at that vigil last night, and Dayton is reeling, and we're sad and frustrated, as you can hear in the voice of the lady who just spoke, and you could hear it in the voice of the people who were chanting. And we are working night and day all across this country to make sure that the Senate hears us, hears those voices of people who are frustrated, to get busy on this universal background check bill and to pass a strong red flag bill.
Yeah, and I just want to say again, because I said it incorrectly and you corrected me, Ohio Moms Demand Action. That's the organization. And you guys were once about violence in the streets, just gun violence in general. How has the messaging changed now that you've been affected by mass shootings?
Well, really, our message hasn't changed. We have been working against all forms of gun violence since Shannon Watts started our group 7 years ago on her laptop in her kitchen on a Facebook page. 100 people a day in the United States, each and every day, are killed by guns, and it doesn't discriminate between race, religion, socioeconomic background. Some of them are violent gun deaths. Well, they're all violent, but some of them are self-inflicted death by suicide. And some of them are these tragic shootings. And really, the tragic shootings, the tragic mass shootings are really a small part of what gun violence is across the United States. So we've been working on these same things since we started. And universal background checks across all of the United States has always been our #1 priority.
Yes. And so universal background checks, what do you think is the next move? If that actually happens, what do you think should be the second step?
Well, we have great consensus on universal background checks. Over 90% of the people in the United States, according to polls, join us in urging the Senate to move. And the other thing that we're really hopeful that the Senate will take up is a strong red flag bill.
All right, so we have Susie Lane. I want to thank you again. She's with Ohio Moms Demand Action. Thanks for joining us. And guys, we're going to go to a quick break and we'll be right back.
ABC News, straightforward.
This is what being live is.
Well, I get to live this each morning together with you. Imagine that. How blessed am I? And that's what makes it such a Good Morning America.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Debrief on ABC News Live. Again, we have to note in just the last 18 months, 7 separate shootings were by white nationalists inside this country, and there have been so many more. It's clear domestic terrorism is becoming the threat of our time. I want to bring in Dr. Eladio Bobadilla. He's an assistant professor of history at the University of Kentucky and an immigration policy expert. Dr. Eladio, you know, this attack in El Paso, it targeted the Mexican and Mexican-American community specifically. The police chief acknowledged that. What are the possible ripple effects of shooting not only this community, but Latinos in this country as a whole?
Well, I think Latinos as a whole in this country have felt under attack for a number of years now. And so this is not shocking to me, frankly. It's devastating. It's horrific. But we have been seeing white nationalist rhetoric, be elevated from something that was fringe to something that is coming out of the White House, that's coming out from the highest seats of American power. And so it doesn't shock me to see this kind of terror, and it doesn't shock me that our communities are frightened, frankly. And we understand that what's happening is not random violence, that it is in fact targeted at certain communities, and that this isn't happening in a vacuum. This has been happening since before the 2016 election, and the president's rhetoric has again certainly elevated something that should be fringe at best to something that has become totally normal to hear from our nation's leadership.
Yeah, and you tweeted recently and you said that gun control won't stop white domestic terror. What did you mean by that?
Well, certainly we need to be having a conversation about guns and gun control. I've just moved to the state of Kentucky, where it's shockingly easy to obtain a gun, and any kind of gun, really. So that's part of the conversation. But I think we need to go beyond that as well. What we're seeing is an incomplete conversation. We're hoping and trying to have a conversation about gun violence, and we should be doing that. But that will always be an incomplete conversation unless we take into account what's driving the violence. Certainly, you can try to take guns off the streets. You can try to make it a little bit more difficult for people to get their hands on weapons that, frankly, shouldn't exist in our streets, that are weapons of war. But while we are talking about gun control, we also need to be talking about violence more generally, and white nationalism, and what is driving this violence against communities of color, against people such as those who have been affected in El Paso. What we're seeing in the manifestos of these white nationalist terrorists is language that is shockingly similar to what you might hear day to day from President Trump. So I think, yes, let's talk about gun control. Let's talk about sensible reform. Let's talk about who should and shouldn't be allowed to have guns, and how easy or difficult that process should be. But also let's talk about just what's driving this gun violence. And when you combine the two, this is what we end up with. We end up with a situation in which people who are filled with hate, who are hearing hate and then using that rhetoric to harm people, have the easiest of access to weapons of war. So those are two important conversations, but they have to be had in unison.
Yeah, and Dr. Eladio, what do you make of the president's comments this morning? Because he said that hate has no place in this country, but as you said, his rhetoric has potentially influenced what's happening in these domestic terror incidents.
Yeah, again, I was hopeful when I first heard some of the words coming out of the White House, because frankly they were uncharacteristic. The White House has used ridiculous language, like, suggesting that both sides, whatever that means, are responsible for our current situation. That's simply untrue. Of course, that white nationalism is the danger at this moment in time. But what really bothered me was that, in one breath, he condemned racism as he should and as we all should. But then he's also tied these terror attacks, and then let's call them what they are. They are attacks meant to terrorize people, to immigration. In one of his tweets, he called, again, strangely for him, for stronger background checks, but then said that essentially that is needed because of the potential for immigrants having access to guns. So, again, in one breath, he did condemn white nationalism and racism, and I appreciate that. But that's simply not good enough when you follow it up with more fear mongering of the kind that you see in the manifestos of these shooters and these people who are attacking Latinos and Latino communities.
All right, Dr. Eladio Bobadilla, assistant professor at the University of Kentucky, thanks so much for joining us today. And guys, obviously, lots of trauma, lots of anxiety, lots of pain. We'll be right back with how to cope with all of this.
ABC News, straightforward.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want. Free. ABC News Live. Stream it now or anytime on Roku, Hulu, Facebook, and abcnews.com.
Doctors. Matatas. Ismail? David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home.
David, good to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
All right, guys, and welcome back to the Debrief on ABC News Live. All of this is pretty heavy, right? You know, this is a public health crisis, and I can't imagine living through a shooting and then dealing with that trauma forever. But we also thought it was important to discuss how people should cope just from consuming this regularly, hearing the details, the names, the deaths, the investigation. It's all traumatizing. So I want to bring in Dr. Jen Ashton and Dr. Jess for this conversation. Dr. Jen, I'll start with you. Let's just start with the people that have actually gone through this. This is a lot of trauma.
Yeah, so the medical angle to this, because of course we have to take into account both the medical and the psychological angle to a mass shooting of this nature. Be clear, at these hospitals, there are dozens of gunshot wound patients, victims who are going in and out of operating rooms. Their recovery is being looked at now hour by hour, day by day, and then it will proceed for weeks, if not months, if not in some cases possibly years. And that is basically standard trauma care. It used to be, for some historical context and perspective, that only military military trauma surgeons had real expertise treating ballistic trauma. Now, unfortunately, things have completely flipped and inverted, and you see civilian trauma surgeons with actually more experience treating ballistic trauma victims than, in some cases, military surgeons. So that's a sad reflection of our current state in terms of medical and surgical care. But those hospitals are incredibly busy now. Their blood banks are taxed. That's why you see the need for blood donation. And there are teams working around the clock, not only taking care of these victims, but also doing the day-to-day care that goes on at every single hospital.
Yeah, and what do you guys make of this? Because some of these people that have been in these mass shootings, they've been in more than one. Some of the people that were in Gilroy were also at Las Vegas. You know, some of the people in Las Vegas were at another mass shooting, which I find unbelievably just crazy.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know?
I mean, I think, again, it speaks to how common these events, unfortunately, have become. And, you know, again, when you look at it, it's not just the physical being that gets injured. It's our emotions. It's our psyche. And that trauma has a ripple effect. It's not just the people who were there at the scene. It's literally anyone who is participating in following these stories.
And Dr. Jess, this is chronic stress, you know, chronic stress for the victims as well as the families and the people that aren't there that are just consuming this.
Absolutely. I mean, back to what you were saying about people who have been exposed to trauma now twice, not to mention trauma that they may experience outside of mass shootings. We're talking about a buildup of stress over time, which can lead to both physical and psychological impacts, right? Depression, anxiety. I think what we often think about is if someone is exposed to this type of trauma, will they develop post-traumatic stress disorder? We know that most won't. However, we have to think about this as a possibility for people who have been exposed to such trauma and terror.
Yeah, and how are people supposed to actually deal with this? I mean, as I told you guys before, I'm from Dayton, Ohio. When I even heard it mentioned, I mean, there's just a weight that comes over you that is compiled with all of the other cities that we can't process because we don't have time. It was just like a few months back that we were doing Thousand Oaks, California, which isn't even in the news. There's no time to process any of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that's really important, and, you know, obviously this is definitely more in the psychology wheelhouse, but children and adults will process this type of trauma differently. And for children, what is really important is they can't distinguish between something they see on television happening once and happening 10, 20, 30 times. They don't understand that it's the same scene being shown repeatedly. They might think it's happening again, it's happening again, it's happening again. So they have a different set of kind of guidance and support than an adult would. But to be clear, you know, first responders need care, they need psychological support. People in the media who are up close and personally covering these tragedies need care and support, and our schools, I mean, literally everywhere. And this is something that we have to connect the mind and the body in a better, more holistic way than we've done in the past, you know, because one definitely affects the other.
And Dr. Jess, you have specific tips on coping with this sort of thing if you're not directly in the tragedy.
Absolutely. So going back to what you've talked about with being from Dayton, right? You are probably looking at the news and trying to follow along just to get a sense of sort of feeling like there's some control that you're able to get back. So what I would recommend is actually taking control of your media exposure. Really rely on sources that are credible, that you can trust, because you don't want to find yourself in a place where you are being overexposed and symptoms are developing because you are not able to get away from the television.
Yes. And what else do you recommend? Because I know you had some other things in terms of community.
Yes. So another important piece to think about is you are not alone in those feelings of anger, frustration, sadness, confusion, even that vulnerability that many feel after such tragedies. So I would encourage people to engage with their support system. You have friends and family who you can spend time with when you're in, you know, a positive place in your life, but also consider that these are people who are experiencing very similar emotions as well, and rely on that support system to talk it out. It may be just what you need to start to feel like you're getting a sense of control again.
And cry. I had to cry, you guys.
And you know, getting those feelings out, again, whatever environment you're in, whether it's your workplace or in your personal social life, it's okay not to be okay. In fact, it's not just okay, it's appropriate not to be okay right now. It's just about managing those and processing those emotions so they don't manage you and take a toll on your physical or mental health.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes people think they have to speed through the process because the news is speeding through because you can't keep up. There's so many things happening, but this takes a long time.
That's right. Exactly.
It does.
You have to give it time to go through its natural arc, its natural process, and different people will progress along their stages of healing and coping at their own pace. But I think there are some glaring warning signs that you always want to be aware of, to reach out to trained mental health professionals or your healthcare provider and say, listen, this is affecting my sleep. I'm relying more on alcohol or substances to cope with this. I'm withdrawing from my social life. It's taking a toll on me. Those can all be warning signs that you need some professional help.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And one thing that I think is pretty sad for the kids in these mass shootings, a lot of kids have anxiety about going to high school, going to school, thinking that this may happen to them. How do you talk to kids about going inside this environment? I mean, I would be terrified as well.
Well, I think the most important thing is to create an environment where, you know, we talk a lot about safe spaces. You want to really provide a space where your child or teen can open up. And so some of the things that you can do right now to create a safe space are literally to listen with an empathic ear, listen to understand your child, be judgment-free. They may say things that you don't necessarily identify with in that moment, but allow them to express what they're feeling and realize that if you create that safe space, they're more likely to come to you in the time of need so that you can progress to resources like mental health treatment if it becomes necessary.
Yeah. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. Like there is hope to get through this somehow.
I think, as a parent, I have a 19 and a 21-year-old, and unfortunately, for well over 5 years now, both of my kids have rehearsed active shooter drills at schools, at camp situations. They're very well versed, unfortunately, in this, in this environment. That doesn't mean they take it for granted, though. And I think as a parent, you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to express to your child at whatever age-appropriate level that is that you hear them, you're with them, that you are taking steps and others are taking steps to make them as safe as possible, and that unfortunately bad things happen in our world and you just have to stay together to deal with it.
All right, Dr. Jen Ashton, Dr. Jess, thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it. And guys, there's going to be more coverage of both of these tragedies on the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. And we're going to leave you with some sound right now. Thanks for joining us today.
This hate-filled individual from out of town will not define this community. We will come together and we will overcome this.
This is a time of allowing themselves to grieve and to remember all of the family members that were here and to, of course, mourn, but don't let this action represent who you are or change you. That's exactly what they wanted. Don't let them do that to you.
As we've endured these horrible times, this community has learned about each other and what is most important to us. People who never would have crossed paths have helped each other in our most painful moments.